seems to be a huge weight. We've finally got the Loki show on our hands, and what a first episode. But before we start, I'm Al, this is the Geek in Review, and let's get to it. Now, I've been really looking forward to this show, probably more than the other Marvel properties that we've had from Disney Plus this year. I did really enjoy WandaVision and Falcon and the Winter Soldier. But as I mentioned in my spoiler-free Loki video, the fact that this is outside the sort of timeline or reality of the mainline MCU, it gives them a bit more freedom to do what they want. And I think we're going to see that going forward. But in this episode, this is just a little rehash and reminder of who Loki is. Because, again, this isn't the guy that we've known from Ragnarok and Infinity Wars. This is the Loki from the Avengers, when he was all about trying to dominate the world, the galaxy, and all that bad stuff. And it really does have a sinister vibe. I forgot how sinister Loki was, and how sort of treacherous that he was. They've made Loki a bit of a comedy character now, and he wasn't always that way, especially in the first Thor film. He was like this scorned, angry teenager, and yeah, we're definitely getting that vibe here as well. When he shows up in the desert, Tony Stark style, he does start to give a little speech to the locals, and then the Time Cops or the TVA show up. And yeah, the way that they held him on that collar, it reminded me a little bit of how Doctor Strange held him in the portals in Ragnarok. And this first episode is just a setup of reminding us of who Loki is, or who this version of Loki is, and introducing the Temporal Variance Authority. And straight away, you can tell the Temporal Variance Authority do not give a toss who Loki is or what he's up to. These guys are just hardened role players. We don't really get a lot of huge backstory on them. The setup of the TVA is a little different from the comic books, but in the comic books, they don't really appear that much. I think there's something like 25 episodes or 25 issues over maybe 30 years. They did appear in originally the late 70s or the early 80s in a Thor comic. And I just wonder how much are these guys going to tie in, if at all, to the MCU, because they already mentioned in the first episode that there's been at least one multiverse war, maybe even more than that. And we know that the MCU is going forward with a multiverse with Doctor Strange and Spiderman. So will this tie in? It would be nice to see Owen Wilson pop up on one of the big screens. I could see him having a nice little chat or a nice little back and forth with Spider-Man. I don't think him and Doctor Strange would particularly get on that well, but that's just me. And his character in this is fantastic. The way we get introduced to him, he's investigating a crime that happened in the 16th century. It appears as being sort of ongoing murders or a serial killer throughout the timeline, a bit sort of like Seven. Once Loki's brought to the Temporal Variance Authority, he's put on trial for basically trying to break the timeline through escaping using the Tesseract. It's a great bit where he tries to use his powers. I think he's trying to pull the daggers out like he does in Ragnarok, when he's trying to square up to Doctor Strange, but it doesn't really work, and this is the first time. We've seen Loki get beat more than once, but we've never seen him where he tries to do something and instantly it just doesn't work, apart from that time the Hulk ragdoll. But this show also answers some questions that the fans have had since Endgame, which is how has the Avengers changing the timeline impacted the Marvel Universe?
Move one of the stones, and that close splits.
Yeah, that's pretty much right out the way, with the judge at the TVA saying it was always supposed to happen, so that's why we didn't interfere. Now, the TVA, as I mentioned, their backstory is a little different to the comics, but basically, if you've seen the show Quantum Leap, they're a bit like that, but instead of Sam Beckett being a quantum physicist, imagine he was an admin civil servant. And I do hope they explain a little bit more about the TVA and how it works, because I don't want to go too much into it, because again, the comic book origins seem to be different from what they're setting up in the TV world, so whether any potential villains going forward are going to be associated with the TVA, I don't know. I think they might be. I might make a video on that, but I'm going to have to wait at least another episode till I get a better feel, because this episode left us on a cliffhanger, well, not on a cliffhanger, but with a set-up for who the villain is. As I said, this episode is just reminding us of which version of Loki we're dealing with. Once he's at the TVA and Owen Wilson saves him, he basically takes him to an interview to break down who Loki is and why he does what he does. And for me, this was the best part of the episode because he reduces Loki from a supervillain to just above a high school bully. And even during all this, when he's saying, okay, we know what you've done, why do you want to conquer Earth after you've conquered Earth, what do you do? He's not taking Loki seriously. Loki is just not on these guys' radar as any sort of threat, which makes me wonder who this killer is that's on the list and what power they have. Are they trying to change the timelines for the better or the worse? It could be a twist, but the last two Marvel TV shows we've expected twists with regards to Quicksilver and Doctor Strange and other things that haven't happened. So I'm not going to get my hopes hung on this too much, but again, as this isn't the original version of Loki, they can be a bit free with it and have fun, and I hope they do. I hope they actually push the boundaries out on this one. But yeah, this episode is just a rehash of the journey of Loki. And he sees it all, he sees everything that happened to the original Loki, the events of the Dark World, Ragnarok, and leading up to his death in Infinity War. And considering he sees his own death, he takes it quite well. Another sort of great nod to this that I picked up the second time that I viewed it is when Loki was in the court with the judge and he's trying to pin the blame on the Avengers. He asks if he can form a special team and hunt them down, and that's pretty much exactly what happened, or what we're led to believe happened with him and Thanos that led up to the events of the first Avengers, with him getting the Chitauri army to try and conquer Earth. But again, it's hard to tell where this show is going to go. One thing I was surprised about is they showed us a DB Cooper thing straight away, and instead of it being something that's going to happen in the show, it was something that Loki had already done. So that was a bit of a fake out, because I'm sure a few people, including myself, were looking to see Loki involved in historic events that we would find familiar, or maybe unsolved historic events. They might still throw that in there, they might be throwing us off the scent. But I don't know, the rest of the stuff I've seen from the trailers looks a bit too much reality and time bending, whereas a DB Cooper story, if you're not familiar with it, it was just a shortened version of what actually happened, which of course they would have to do for an hour TV show. But I quite enjoyed it. But the thing that I really took away from this is when Mobius tells Loki that if he's supposed to rule, or he asks Loki, if you're supposed to rule everything, why do you keep losing? And he tells him that his purpose is basically, you don't win, but by you trying, you make people better, i.e. the formation of the original Avengers going back to 2012. And that, I think, really knocks Loki's socks off a little bit, that he isn't the all-powerful big eye that he thought. He's not his father, he's not even his brother, and he's always stood in the shadow of that, and he does seem to be letting that go. One thing I also expected from this show that they got out the way straight away was Loki interfering in his own timeline, because he watches his mother and his father's death, and given what they'd done in Endgame with the time travel, I thought, they might go back and throw Tom Hiddleston in a few scenes here and there, and I didn't think they'd do it with Thor or Odin. I thought they might do it with his mother, but they've got all that out the way, which I think is a great decision, so they can just focus on whatever villain or problem they're going to be dealing with. Would you find out how powerful the Time Variance Authority are, that they've just got Infinity Stones sitting in a desk drawer now. These might not be the Infinity Stones that we're familiar with, because if you look at them, I think the stone that he picks up is the Time Stone, and it's noticeably larger than we've seen it before. And at least the Time Stone or all the Infinity Stones seem to have come in that raw form that have then been shaped down, which does lead to a few questions about what's going on with the Infinity Stones. I mean, if you're shaving them down, are you creating more than one Infinity Stone? Are these Infinity Stones from a multiverse? Because they do mention the multiverse in this episode. There's a lot they can do. They're keeping it close to their chest. We're going to have to wait for a Spider-Man and a Doctor Strange trailer or teaser even, before we even get a hint. And at that, they're probably not going to give away too much either. There's been a lot of Spider-Man leaks, but as far as I know from Doctor Strange, they're keeping that one quite under wraps. But all in all, I think this was a great first episode. They tied everything up that they had to tie up from Endgame. They caught the audience up into who this Loki is. They've reminded us of what he is. And from the rumours that I've heard, this is going to be crazy. It's going to be even crazier than WandaVision. I actually was kind of disappointed with the last episode or so of WandaVision. I know a few people were. Marvel's, or Disney and Marvel's sort of formula for these shows so far seems to be just have a giant punch-up in the last episode. Like a massive fight, and that'll tie everything off. I hope they don't do it in this one. I hope there's something different, that we don't get that all-consuming 50-minute fight. But I guess we're going to have to wait and see. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and on Twitter. You can reach me at the Geeks Reviews. There'll be more Loki and Marvel videos coming. I've also got some Star Trek stuff. And finally, after some technical errors, my Jupiter's Legacy review. So keep an eye out for that. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel to help support it. My name's Al, and have a great weekend.